A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Serious, Redditors who believe in the paranormal, what convinced you it's real? I did not believe in such, and I still hold the view that 99.999% of such observations are either of following. Intellectual misinterpretation, that is, you settle for a paranormal reasoning instead of a rational one, overvalued idea, hallucinations, sleep paralysis, some medical cause like CO poisoning, drugs, high fever, culturally patterned deductions, or even outright delusions. However, my own experiences, shared by multiple people at different times, but within the same place, over an extended period of time, convinced all of us, the observers/victims/subjects, that paranormal per se exists. Just how do you explain a levitating bed? High enough for me to leave scratch marks up on the ceiling. Both me and my wife having to wake up to an irritating knock on our bedroom door in dead of the night, to see my father staring at me and carrying a very angry look, saying absolutely nothing as we ask him was everything alright. Escorting him back to his bedroom, opening his bedroom door to discover that my father was sound asleep on bed, and the entity who we had escorted being nowhere. It all happened in late 1990s to early 2000s. We sold that house. I can narrate load of such like happenings, but that is why I am a believer. I go camping and multi-day hiking as a hobby. I've been stalked by a mountain lion before and have been hopelessly lost 100 miles from anything, so I know the woods. The weirdest thing I've ever heard was a wailing in the night. What this thing was, but I woke up around 2 a.m., my fire had died and there was an overcast, so it was pretty much completely dark. I was camped in a ravine-like valley, cutting through the mountains of Tennessee. This noise was in the valley coming right at me, from some distance over 500 yards. It really sounded like a man yelling in deathly agony. If you've ever heard somebody's yells who are passing due to trauma, that is how it sounded. It's an odd thing and unsettling to describe. Anyways, I was lying in the dark, gun in hands, while this thing was getting closer and closer. Within 300 yards, it stopped wailing and left me in silence. A couple minutes after it stopped, I could hardly make out a figure in the dark about 25 yards to my right. Whatever it was tall, at least 5 feet so, and it was moving roughly west to east at a pretty good pace, making absolutely no noise as it went. It seemed to be gliding along, there was no lateral movement with this thing. It just went by and I heard it wail a couple more times far down the valley. The next day I checked for tracks and didn't find any of significance, just old deer tracks. I still have no idea what could have made that noise. It was hauntingly human and sounded extremely distressed. I still don't believe in the paranormal, but that definitely made me question it. TLDR, heard what sounded like a man, screaming in agony during the late night, deep in the wilderness, and saw an odd, seemingly gliding figure in the dark. What convinced me was I saw it happened, and my cousin saw it with me. Was cruising through some rural areas in my cousin's car, I wanna say 1 or 2 a.m., weren't smoking or drinking, just having a nice cruise. Went on this road that went through some heavy woods, but we did it before so we had no fears. It was dark, of course, no moon, with just a slight sprinkle of rain. We were coming to this part in the woods where there was a street light, but it was an old light, was dimming out. There used to be an old building there, but was tore down, but the light stayed up for a few years. Mind you, this was very rural, no one lived nearby for maybe 20 miles, so it was extremely rare you pass another car, let alone another person at this time. Didn't help that the locals said stay out of the woods at night. I was just looking out my window at the woods when we were coming up to the light. Next thing I know, the car does a movie turn, like stomp the brakes, do a 180, and fucking burn rubber the other way. I get weirded out and look back through the car. I see the road illuminated by the street light, and see this massive black figure beside the road. It takes one step, and it's in the middle of the road, another step and it's already on the other side. Immediately I look forward, scared out of my mind, look at my cousin, see intense fear on his face. We don't say a word to each other, and he drops me off, I stay up till sunrise and finally go sleep. Funny now that I think about it, we never talked about once, not after it happened. But yeah, we saw Bigfoot, as do the locals who tell similar stories. Our family vacations when I was a kid was always camping and hiking. Lots of hiking. Usually somewhere in Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee. We went to the Blue Ridge Mountains pretty often. We always did day hikes, so we'd get to the peak and back down in one day without worrying about nightfall. We were at the top of one of the mountains and I was messing around climbing up on this rock that was even higher up. I walked around the taller rock and this guy, walking stick in hand, red shorts, white t-shirt, is standing there. It surprised me a bit because I didn't know someone else was on this part of the mountain, and he smiles at me and goes, "Careful. It drops off over here." And he walked around the bend a little, out of sight, and I followed. Saw the huge drop off, but no fellow hiker. Anywhere. He wasn't there. I turned around and walked back and met up with my parents again and told them about this. My dad said it must have been a guardian angel. I dunno what it was. Paranormal? Maybe. Not spooky. Just a friendly warning. There was no one in that whole mountain top area that looked anything like him. He didn't walk past me to go back down. It was very, very real. I can honestly not explain it. I used to live in a very old house and shit would happen that you just could not explain rationally. It's really hard for me to explain to people because it sounds like I'm nuts, but my mother also experienced a lot of it. Doors would open/close and slam at random. I witnessed this firsthand dozens of times while living there. Now you could say that it could have been air pressure causing it or some type of draft. That absolutely wasn't the case. Something that also happened is TVs would turn off/on. One thing that happened frequently would be you would leave a room and the TV would turn off behind you. Random noises like footsteps and knocks. You would often wake up and the door you knew was shut would be wide open. This house had a lot of older iron door latches and whatnot, and you could clearly hear those turn when doors would open. In this house there was a main living room and a sub-living area. Between the two there was a door. I once sat on the couch and watched the door knob turn and the door slowly creep open. My mom and I had moved into this house because she married the man that owned it. Shortly after moving there passed away. And his previous wife had died in the house as well, and he always told stories about weird shit happening in the time I had knew him. I'm late to the game, but this experience changed how I thought about the universe. I was sexually abused as a kid and had panic attacks and PTSD all throughout most of my adult life. I couldn't ever talk about it without launching myself into a full-on panic, and often, my mind would obsess over the bad stuff if I couldn't distract myself, so things like insomnia were excruciating. A few years ago, I had awoken somewhere around 3 a.m. after a horrible nightmare where I, once again, had relived some of the pain. I was in such despair and, although I had not been a praying person in the past, began to beg God, the universe, anything that's out there, to have this pain taken from me. I don't remember how I said it or for how long I was begging, but all I know is I felt this pull in my chest, and it was as if something physical, like a lump of tar that wanted to cling on, was being pulled from it. I would have thought I was dreaming, but when it finally let go the bed bounced when I landed back onto it and my husband woke up. He asked me if I was okay and suddenly I was. I laid there in shock for a few minutes, but quickly fell asleep. The next day I told him what happened and we cried happy tears together. Since then, I've never had another panic attack, and I have been able to talk about what happened to me when it is important to share. I don't have the obsessive thoughts, I don't have any of the PTSD symptoms. Don't get me wrong, it still sucks to have those memories in my head, but I have been able to move on and be happy. Whatever took that pain from me that night, it was real for me. TLDR, the spooky things haunted me in real life, something good took them away from me. My family in general has attracted many spirits to themselves, so it's something I kinda grew up with. My personal experience happened a long time ago. I was 5 or 6. My grandmother had just passed away and it was a few days after her memorial, where we had spread her ashes. Now, my grandmother loved animals, and had tons. She had snakes, toads, chinchillas, tarantulas, and quite a few cats. The cats were very sweet, and also very smart. 2 of the cats, Lancelot and Arthur, liked to play in the kitchen. Arthur was an all-white kitty that for whatever reason liked to play with the oven. He could open it himself, and liked to rest in there. It was never on, my grandmother always kept it unplugged and all that so he could have his spot. On that day, a week after my grandmother's memorial, my uncle, her youngest brother, came to help clean out the house and take the kitties to his ranch, where he helped foster all kinds of animals. We were looking for Arthur, we couldn't find him. Everyone was out in the garden looking for him, but I heard light slamming in the kitchen. I wandered in, and my grandmother was standing there. I was shocked, and a little scared, but she looked like she was making something, as she would when she was alive. She was very focused on it for a few seconds when she noticed me. She gave me one of her sly smiles she used to give me when she would play a prank, or do something my mom would disapprove of, and put a finger to her lips. She pointed at the oven door, which was still shaking. I looked at it and when I looked back at her, she was gone. I opened the oven and it was poor Arthur trying to get out. Afterwards, I didn't think much of it, in fact I had forgotten it until my mom and I exchanged personal ghost stories not long ago. When I was about 8 my mom and I lived with some family friends. During winter I was staring out their window looking at the snow and out of the corner of my eye I see my grandmother. I've only seen her in photos mainly because she committed suicide before I was 1. From the corner of my eye I could see white slippers, what looked like to be one of those nightgowns some old people wear, and the bottom of her dark brown curls. Obviously, this startled me and I ran to go tell my mom about this because they were really close. I stopped for some reason and looked at the floor and slowly looked up and realized that she was in front of me. Once I realized what just happened I went and told my mom. She said that my grandmother was looking after me since we were going through a hard time and that I always should consider her my guardian angel after that. I still don't understand what I saw. When I was in 4th grade I just moved into my dad and stepmom's house. My sister and I slept in bunk beds, hers being the bottom and mine the top. The bed rested against the wall with the door at the foot of the bed. One night I'm sleeping at the head of the bed and I wake up and hear some weird noises. At first I think it's my sister, but I poke my head down and see that it's not. Something compels me to look out the door and into the hallway. I scoot down to the foot of the bed and stick my head out the top of the foot frame and face my parents' bedroom door that is across from mine. I look to the floor and there is this pitch black human-looking thing on the ground. I don't know what I did, but it noticed me and it scuttles or crawls fast across the floor and up my bunk ladder, and I just remember seeing black. I remember waking up that morning at that same spot of the bed. If anybody has an idea of what this is, it would help a lot. When I was younger I used to collect porcelain dolls. My mom was a huge fan and would often bring me some back from Mexico. The dolls would move out of the corner of my eye, sometimes appear in new places I hadn't placed them. Eventually, I got rid of my entire collection out of fear. But this isn't about the dolls. Around 10 years old my aunt used to drop her kid off at random hours of the night so she could party freely. I remember many nights waking up and seeing my young cousin crying standing next to my bed waiting for me to acknowledge her. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. and saw the outline of a small girl with long curly hair. I spoke out to her, thinking it was my cousin. I told her to come to bed. But she was unmoving. The outline stayed there, staring at me. Eventually I went back to sleep, still under the assumption it was my kid cousin acting up. The following morning I went into the kitchen searching for my cousin. I remember asking my mom where she was at and she told me my cousin never came by that night. Fast forward a couple years, more spooky shit continues going on in the house, so my mother brings in a lady to bless the house. When the woman walked into my room I remember the look on her face. She stopped and looked around, whispering prayers. The woman stopped her whispers and asked my mom, "Have you had a daughter that's passed?" Of course I'm the only living daughter, so I tell the woman no, it can't be possible. But my mom spoke about how before I was born she had miscarried another girl. The woman continued on describing my unborn sister. She had curly hair like me, she enjoyed playing with dolls, and according to the woman she came often to visit me. I lived in a house with a poltergeist for around 15 years. The house was Victorian and the poltergeist just used to steal things and then put them back in odd places weeks later. We often found my dad's and my glasses in funny places in the morning after we'd put them on the bedside table at night, like the cat's food bowl or, once, in the garden. My A-level Latin set textbook of the Aeneid went missing for 2 weeks before turning up in the fridge, a month before my exam as well. That one was irritating. A coffee table once moved from the downstairs living room to the living room upstairs overnight. We found a plant from the garden dumped on our dining room table once, roots and soil and all. We set up cameras for a few months at one point after I found my glasses in the garden, because we thought maybe one of us was sleepwalking or the cat was stealing things, but no sleepwalking, no kleptomaniac cat, and no floating objects or anything either. It was like stuff would dematerialize and dematerialize somewhere else. I wholeheartedly don't believe in the paranormal. Have lived in remote regions, served in combat, and have lived for a better part camping/hiking/running in the woods to not be spooked or terrified of a lot of the unknowns in this world. Here is where all that changed in a moment. My friend and I were seated in my living room. It was a town home with only one door and sliding glass patio door for entrances. The sliding glass door was in the living room, and the main door 15 feet south of the area. We watched some show I cannot recall at pretty low volume due to us having a roommate asleep that had to work early the next day. And then, I shit you not, clear as fucking crystal, a girl whispered, "Hey," from behind us. I sat motionless as every fiber of my being was electrified, attempting to register what was happening. After 5 to 10 seconds after I thought I was finally losing it, my roommate says, "Did you fucking hear that too?" We ran through the house attempting to find the perpetrators. Nothing. No sign of entrance, everything was dead-bolted, bad neighborhood, no other person there. It made no sense. But that, "Hey," will never leave me. It was a voice. I heard it clear as day, like it was a friend 5 feet away attempting to get your attention. I moved into an apartment building after getting my first job at 18. Over the years I've been in all of the apartments in that building, but I only ever rented 2. Creepy things happened all the time, we mostly just brushed it off as old pipes/faulty wiring/drafts, etc. The place was built in the late 19th century, it made sense. There was one time that I actually came face to face with what I can only assume was a ghost, and I never went back in that building again. It's weird, when your brain sees something it knows can't possibly be there. In that moment something in my mind just snapped, and I was overwhelmed by absolute, instantaneous, pants-pissing dread. All over a face, in a hole, in a ceiling. A face that, after making eye contact, backed into the darkness as if retreating into shadows that simply weren't there. It's been 11 years and I can still see it. It had no eyes. Just black sockets. Gaunt face, drawn lips, and no teeth in its mouth. It looked afraid. And it was white. So white. There was no sound, in that moment. I remember that too. This thing didn't move. It was just there, and then gone. I don't know what it was. I know nobody would sleep in that room. I know that after seeing this thing I climbed down off of the chair and walked out of that apartment, never to set foot inside again. I know that now I still get creeped out even walking past that building. And I'm not going to sleep tonight, now. Damn it. I've had a lot of undeniable instances over the course of my life, shadow figures, objects taken and replaced, smells, voices, etc. I've never really felt threatened though. Most recent events have all taken place in my mother's house. It's a nice thing in a suburban area, built back in the 70s. I've seen a few things in there that have convinced me more than anything, but only one account of something has been confirmed by the both of us. There is something in her house that will mimic both of us, but never mimics her boyfriend, who actually lives with her while I only used to spend a couple nights of the week there. The first and only instance I caught wind of it was one night when I was dropped off to spend the night before work the next day. My mother lives closer to my second work location, so a few nights a week I'll stay at her place. She and her boyfriend are in the house flipping business, so they spent a majority of last year being at the house they were flipping every night of the week after he got home from work at 6. Point being, whenever I came around, I was always home alone. One night I get dropped off and I open the front door while my back holds open the storm door because I was struggling with my night bag. I leave the door open while I bend down to grab my night bag and I hear my mother's voice in the front of the house with me. She's saying something as I'm bending down, but it sounds so distorted and low that it sounds like she's sick, and I even catch a glimpse of her in her pajamas straightening her house robe before I bend down. When I look back up and ask her what she had said to me, she's not there. I'm confused, as she would have had to literally sprint down the hall for me to not see her anymore. I walk inside with my stuff, set it down, and begin looking for her around the house. Her little Yorkie hears me and comes running while I look. I check the entire rest of the house, there is no one home at all. I'll never forget how her voice sounded to me, exactly the voice of my mother but so otherworldly at the same time, like a video of those cats/dogs that sound like they're talking. A few weeks later my mother told me that one day she and her dog were sitting in the den when she suddenly heard my voice from the front of the house, amiably calling for the dog. The little dog heard it too and came running as commanded. It wasn't a day that I usually come over, so my mom got up to come greet me, except, of course, I wasn't there. She was alone, and she told me that even the dog had started to act a little strangely when it ran to where it heard me. My husband and I bought a house that is haunted. People died on the land. People are buried on the land. 2 homeowners before us were in a satanic cult and killed animals. There is a Satan circle in our attic. We hear footsteps, voices, laughter, whispers, screaming, etc. We seen things outside our house, full-body spirits, face peeking in the windows, and people peeking out from the staircase. We been poke, pitch, scratch, bruised, had bedding torn off, bumped into, and woken up. The last homeowners sold us our house and land for cheap because they refused to go back in the house without the Pope and the Holy Lord by their side. We have debunked some things, but there are still things we can't explain. I want to stop believing in ghosts, but I can't.